Welcome to the Dream, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Tamashi, and welcome to the new and improved Kefka guide covering his LD boards, which he'll be getting soon, and what he'll be getting in the level 90 era, his BT+, rework, and his level 90 itself. In this guide, we'll be covering how to play him, how to team build with him, what characters work well with him, which are his kryptonite, and when you should be pulling for him. We'll also be covering which Lufenias and Lufenia Pluses you will want to bring him to. Now, I won't be looking off of Dissidia DB or Dissidia Compendium for this video when it comes to Kefka's kit itself. Not because they are bad sources, mind you. I use them often, and I encourage you all to support them, because they are wonderful people that do amazing work. It's because Kefka has been my main since the start of the Cosmos era. I'm one of the two crazy people that uploaded runs of Reno's event Lufenia running Kefka, Edward, and Yuna. I know his kit like the back of my hand. The footage in this video is either my own gameplay or VL's, who is a fantastic JP content creator you should sub to if you haven't already. He has many great Lufenia and Lufenia Plus clears, as well as some pretty funny editing, and sprite skits waiting for you. His channel, Dissidia DB, the Tom Perry Troop, and Dissidia Compendium will be in the link in the description and in the pinned comments. Remember to like the video and share it around to have others decide if Kefka is the character for them. Also subscribe and hit the bell for notifications for more content. If you want more videos like this, or just want to say you found this video helpful or informative, please sound off in the comments because I love reading them. Now let's talk about his pros and cons pre and post rework. Pros pre-rework: strong debuff potency, some of the strongest in the game in fact. Strong stun locking capabilities similar to EL Narch, though HP silence is resisted a bit more than El Nacho's Terror. He's still probably the strongest stun locker in the game overall because of how many uses of Trine he can have and the amount he slows down enemies. He fills enemy buff slots with framed debuffs, which is great because enemies cleanse less often going forward. Gone are the days of auto cleanse, which is great because no one, and I mean literally no one, liked this mechanic to begin with. Cleanse will still happen, but it will be rare and fights will actually be designed around this mechanic rather than spammed haphazardly like most of early to mid Lufenia. He's got strong single-target instant break on his EX. He can cover a wide variety of Lufenia orbs. He's a great blue armor choice. The hardest fights the game has to offer will be made significantly easier or even trivialized by him. Remember Act 3 Chapter 1 Part 1 Lufenia? Remember how horrible Abyss 4's last fight was? Wouldn't you make them easier on yourself if you could? If you struggled on those fights in the past, Kefka would have made them significantly easier, and he's going to make fights like them going forward easier as well. Cons pre-rework: mediocre damage, especially if you don't have his blue armor or are running him in non-battery related parties. He wastes turns with high speed and high turn rate attacks. He is not new player friendly. Though he has a wide variety of characters that combo well with him, that doesn't mean those characters combo well with each other, so thought needs to be put into his team compositions, which we'll go over later. LD board, which makes it easier to push off his HP silence, which hurts his team compositions. You can no longer choose if his skill 2 debuffs will be there. They are a constant that you will always have to contend with, for better or worse. One of the worst burst effects and burst phases in the game due to his med damage and high turn rate. He currently has a bug that reverts all his skills to their base versions when fighting 3 targets that have more than 6 debuffs. He takes 3 turns to ramp up. Post-LD boards Kefka is effectively the villain equivalent to Cloud. They cover many different orb conditions and provide excellent utility to the party. Even when 1 or 2 aspects of their kit are resisted, they have other things going for them that make them a good slot in many parties. Note that that does not mean just because you have Cloud you can skip Kefka. They do different things. Having Eldnarch also doesn't make Kefka an easy skip. They have similar roles, but do it in very different ways that satisfy different orb conditions. Another character I compare Kefka to is Porum. Porum is a character you want to have because she makes your life easier in difficult content. Kefka is the same deal. He just does it in a different way and works with a different set of characters, so it's less obvious how powerful Kefka actually is. Pros post rework: high damage ceiling that can allow him to compete with, and at times even out-damage, premier damage characters like Tifa. No, really, his damage ceiling is quite frankly stupid. One of the best Burst Plus effects in the game, raising party HP damage by 40%, and that triggers twice on splash damage, similar to Kurasame and Gabranth's debuffs, which no other burst in the game does. While there may be total party HP damage ups that are higher, like Theodore's with his Burst Plus active, which is 60%, Kefka's is overall stronger because of his interaction with splash damage. 80% Brv Damage up to the party with 8 debuffs, 30% max game Brave Overflow, and HP damage uncapped 20% to the party. This Burst Plus is stupid. It also lasts for 8 turns. He has powerful utility through Silence and Blind, crippling debuffs, covers many orb conditions, skill damage and burst duration that actually complements his high speed and damage output, and there are many characters that combo well with him, and still a great blue armor choice. Cons post-rework: Meteor is still a worthless button, don't press it. No, really, never press this attack. Still not beginner-friendly, and you will need to pay careful attention to ensure team synergy between all 3 characters. No buff start, so he still takes 3 turns to ramp up. Kefka needs his blue armor. His damage ceiling is absurdly high, but he'll need his blue armor to let him hit those absurdly high caps. Kefka requires a lot of resource investment. You need to max out all of his MLBable weapons, which will cost you a max of 38 Power Stones, assuming you sell his 15 and 35 in LD. 2 Ignits, assuming you sell his EX Plus after MLBing it. You need to either gem his burst or token it, and then you have to spend a BT book and 3 Ignits on it, because his BT Plus is so good he basically needs it. Then you gotta spend 3 Ignits on his 7-star armor, which are very rare. Now, he is 100% worth this investment, but it's still a lot to ask of someone just for one character. Kefka post level 90 is one of the best characters in the game, once more providing you great utility that will come in handy in many Lufenia Plus fights, and he can now dish out incredible damage to contend with other Matic DPS characters, and he brings along back-breaking auras with his BT Plus to boot. If you don't have Kefka already, you are probably wondering when is the best time to pull for his LD and BT. If you don't have either Vaughn or Ardent's BT already, the answer is the triple BT banner coming up. And if you have both, the answer is still probably this banner. The chance of you getting a BT are tripled, so if you get BT dupes along the way, like I did when I pulled for Squall BT and Cypher recently, at least you are getting extra BT tokens. Your next chance to get him will be in the level 90 era, where he and Guy get massive glow-ups that make them some of the most powerful characters in the game at the time. And they pair really well together. Personally, I think the best time to pull for Guy is with his LC, with Sync LD, which is what I'll be doing since I not only already have Kefka, but Vaughn and Arden as well. Alright, I've blued Kefka, I've got his BT. What Spears and Arts should I give him? Kefka is a magic DPS utility debuffer. You'll want to give him spears that either raise his damage output, or increase his utility via auras. My loadout is his own spear, Yuffie spear, and Fujin spear. Don't give him spears that inflict an actual debuff, and more importantly, don't give generic debuff spears to characters you'll be using with Kefka, which is many. Many characters work with Kefka, don't use these spears. You run the risk of either pushing his HP Silence and Blind off before he can frame them, or wasting a spear, because his debuffs are stronger than all generic debuff spears. You can go Faris spear over Fujin, but as time goes on, Fujin's spear value will grow exponentially, whereas Faris's will grow in value at a far slower rate. As for artifacts, for pre-level 90 Kefka, Attack 108 Max Brave 330 is ideal, because Kefka will hit his Brave caps for most of the fight up until the Lufenia Plus era, so the extra 15% attack won't be noticeable at all. You'll want his sap to do more Brave damage as it's based on 20% of his max Brave, and you'll raise Kefka's potential damage with Skill 2. Remember, Kefka's Skill 1 and Skill 2 are split HP damage attacks, so the more max Brave, the better. Post level 90 Kefka becomes a phenomenal damage dealer with high Brv Damage caps, which you may struggle to hit near the ends of fights, so attack 108, C50 is what you'll want to have post level 90. What orbs does Kefka cover? He has single target instant break on a slightly fast recharging EX, which also has self buff extension on it, so you can bring him for buff extension orbs. His EX also inflicts Sneering Clown, which is a minus 20% to attack, defense, and speed, along with a 20% max Brave Sap, so he covers Sap orbs. Do note the debuff start version of Sneering Clown is only 10% max Brave, which could be a bug. His skills all inflict debuffs. Skill 1 inflicts 2, whilst his Skill 2 and LD inflict 3, which will cover all number of debuff inflicted related orbs. He's got Blind, which will cover dodge orbs, like Queen, LC Lufenia Plus, and Act 3 Chapter 6 Part 2 Lufenia Plus. Lastly, he has HP Silence, which will cover enemy must not act orbs, so long as they aren't immune to it. In the previous Kefka guide, I talked about the formula N+1 is less than or equal to 3 plus R. Throw that into the trash because post-LD boards and the debuff limit increase, this formula no longer works. And it is the impetus for me making this guide in the first place. I now have a few new formulas for you guys, but before we get into that, there is a very important question you must be asking yourself when you are making a team for Kefka. Why are you bringing him? If the answer is, I am bringing him for his HP Silence, this is the formula you need to follow. 6 minus R plus N plus C equals 8. 6 is the number of debuffs Kefka himself brings to the table. R is the number of those debuffs the enemy resists. N is the number of framed debuffs that the other two party members bring that are different from Kefka's. C is the number of framed debuffs your calls inflict. 8 is the amount of debuffs you can have on a single enemy at any given time. It's important that you always have 8 debuffs inflicted on the enemy, because Kefka's damage directly correlates to the amount of debuffs there are on each target. When Kefka's LD buff is on, his HP damage up to himself increases from 5% up to 40%. This might sound familiar. That's because this is the exact same effect as his base BT effect, just for himself. If the answer to the previous question was, I am bringing him for debuff stacking and DPS, we got two formulas. 4 minus R plus N plus C equals 8, and 5 minus R plus N plus C equals 8. The former formula assumes you are not going to be using Blind, while the latter formula does. Kefka boasts some of the strongest debuff totals in the game. 90% attack down, 110% defense down, 60% speed down, 70% with Fujin Spear, 20% max Brave Sap, and 50% blind. So with proper stacking, you can make enemies hit for peanuts. That is, if they even hit at all. Ruin their defenses so your other damage dealers can crank out damage, and or cripple their speed so the turn order is manageable. A trick to keep in mind is that a debuff you don't plan on using is one you can omit from the formula. For example, Ramza's EX debuff, which is just a worse version of Kefka's Sneering Clown. You can clog all the debuff slots and not have to worry about it going on enemies, when you'd rather have a different, more powerful debuff in its place. For moves and calls that inflict multiple framed debuffs, pay attention to the order in which they are inflicted. If all you want from Gabranth's call is the HP damage up, then inflict 7 framed debuffs before calling him. Since the HP damage up debuff is the first one that's inflicted, that's the only debuff that will be inflicted. Want Faris's Imperil? Inflict 7 debuffs, and then call Faris, and now you'll have just Enchanting Dance on all enemies, which means you'll have Wind, Water, Thunder Enchant, a stronger generic attack down, and Brv Damage dealt down on all enemies on top of setting their Brave to 0 after every turn. Now that we know why we are bringing Kefka, and the formulas for his successful team composition, let's talk about the characters that work well with him, and which don't. Since it's easier to talk about characters to avoid because there are far fewer of them than you would think, we'll talk about them first. Don't pair Kefka up with characters that sport 1-turn duration debuffs like Cypher, X-Death, and Emperor. You can make them work, especially if the debuff isn't mandatory for whatever you're going for, but your goal is to maintain a constant of 8 debuffs on the enemy an entire fight, so short durations are poison to Kefka's kit. Next, trap characters that need the enemy to act in order for their traps to proc. I'm referring to characters like Trey, pre-level 90, because enemies will be acting far less often than they normally would, assuming Kefka's speed downs are active. Ace is not one of these characters, so you can make them work together. He does have a single duration debuff, but they still pair fine, because again, it's not that you can't do it, but you need to be aware of it if you want to maintain Kefka's damage output. A link to Dinam's Powell's Ace Kefka Rosa run of Act 3 Chapter 6 Part 1's Lufenia Plus will be in the description of the pinned comments, as well as his run of the most recent boss rush, where he used Ace. Ace brings other things to the table that makes him pair well with Kefka. If you are using the HP Silence formula, avoid using characters that use counters or rely on dodge, because those characters will be wasted slots. Unlike Ace, who can still work in spite of my prior advice, these characters are anathema to each other when going for this strat. The enemy will never hit them, so Gao and Gladio are no-goes, and 8 and Galuf are also hard-nosed. You can use them on the stacking formulas, and 8 and Galuf can be used on the blind formula, but be mindful if speed down isn't resisted, because the enemy will be taking fewer turns, and therefore proccing counters less. Don't put Ami or Faris in your main party, just don't. Faris inflicts 5 debuffs when she comes onto the field, and Ami inflicts 4. You can use them as calls if you want, but that's it. You can make them work with Kefka. Again, follow the formulas. But if those are your best partners for Kefka for any given fight, you should either be re-evaluating if you should be bringing Kefka to the fight in the first place, or your entire roster, because something went wrong if that is your best option. Now, that's pretty much it for characters that are straight up a no-go for Kefka. You might be surprised considering how much shit I've talked about Kefka in the past. Well, that's because there are parts of his kit that are nonsensical and should have been changed. He has Sap and Brave regen in his kit, but they are a drop in the pond because Brave gain reductions are getting worse, and he doesn't have Brave gain up in his kit. His Shrine Battery before Brave hits might as well not exist for the same reason. His Meteor Plus is a worthless button. It's an attack you only get access to after using his EX, but it's a single HP dump, even post level 90, and didn't get recast gauge up like other limited use attacks, or anything to make it more useful. And again, the Brave refund is worthless due to Brave gain reductions. I have other issues with this kit, but this is a Kefka guide and not a Kefka roast. Besides, he's still an exceptional character that is a boon to any roster. When you are intimately familiar with a character, their flaws are always in your mind, no matter how good they are, and this goes for any game. Now, if you're following the formulas, your team will at least function. But if you want your team to excel, there are a few character roles you'll want to pair up with Kefka. Kefka wants battery, and lots of it. This was the case before, but it's even more needed now with his high damage ceiling but low damage floor, which is reminiscent of my favorite punchy boy Zell, who I might also do a guide on in the future. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that in the comments. Keys and Selfie related launch comps actually work really well for Kefka, because he'll be getting the battery he so desperately needs after every launch, on top of doing some good damage. Kefka pre-level 90 tends to waste a lot of turns without doing much of anything. While battery and regen characters can help mitigate this, another helpful role you should stick around Kefka are turn stealers and manipulators. Your Lightnings, Veins, Terras, Zells, etc. They can also take advantage of Kefka's short base BT and make amazing use of his BT+. You'll also want characters that raise HP damage up and Brave damage up to the party in some way, either via auras or debuff. Ideally, you'll want them to do it through an aura so you can bring HP damage up calls like Kurasame and Dark Knight Cecil, or Brave damage up calls like Jack and Sephiroth. Pre-rework HP damage up calls are significantly more valuable to Kefka than Brave damage up calls because of his low Brave hits, but Sephiroth Call will still be incredibly powerful on everyone's favorite god of magic because it can't be removed and can stay present for 8 enemy turns. We have few characters on Global that can do this outside of 7-star armors, but look into pairing Kefka with characters that can raise the HP damage cap and the Brave damage cap, because the more Brave damage Kefka can do, the more damage he will do, because his Brv Damage potencies and self-brave and HP damage ups are, especially post-level 90, are very high. This can be the difference between hitting 300k per target with Light of Judgment in the level 90 era to hitting 500k plus per target. Characters like, well, most BT characters raise Brv Damage cap up to the party, but a lot of the LD-only support characters of the level 90 era do as well. Pull Llyud. No, really, pull him. He is such an incredible partner, not just for Kefka, but the entire roster in general. You won't regret it. As for HP damage up outside of Kefka's own BT+, you have Arden, whose BT is kind of terrible, the twins, Gilgamesh post BT+, Ace, Jekt, and any other character with the support keystone like Mog and Hope. On fights where the enemy is resistant to magic, framed and aura Imperil characters are a godsend, so anytime you notice one, pull for them, because they enable Kefka to be used everywhere that isn't immune to debuffs. These characters are plentiful and open up your comp options for non-framed enchanters as well. Characters like Xanda, Bartz, Jekt, Ignis, Ashe, Kuja, Kurasame, Theodore. Pull for them, they're really useful. Pre-level 90 Kefka wants to be paired with 2 damage dealers, Kefka Squall Tifa, or 1 damage dealer and 1 support, Kefka Rosa Zell. This will make up for Kefka's weak damage output. Post-level 90 Kefka will either want 1 support and 1 damage dealer, Kefka Zell Llyud, or 2 supports, Kefka Rosa Guy. Post-level 90 Kefka is a much better damage dealer, and can actually be the sole damage dealer of the party if you want him to be, so long as you are fighting 2 enemies or more. Kefka's single target damage is okay, but okay is just not good enough in the Lufenia Plus environment. As for rotation, pre-level 90 you'll start with Trine, LD, then Light of Judgment, then EX, and then alternate between spamming Light of Judgment until Havoc Wing is back up, or using Trine to reapply or maintain Silence and Blind, assuming you are going for the HP Silence or Blind strats. If you aren't, you'll leave out Trine of your rotation until 8-frame debuffs are inflicted. For fights where you'll need to inflict break, you might need to hold onto his EX for key moments. Post BT+, you'll want to do the same, except whenever you use Hyperdrive, you want to use your free ability on his C65. Kefka's C65 will dramatically raise the Man Mage's damage output and damage potential by raising his Brv Damage cap, his Brv Damage up, and max Brave, and bring his foes closer to ruin. Before going into BT, you'll want to use Hyperdrive, because Meteor Plus is bad unless there are 3 targets, and you can get much more out of his BT phase this way. In BT Plus phase, you'll want to use Skill 2, Skill 1, Havoc Wing, LD, Skill 2, and then finally another Skill 2. Kefka's base BT effect is straight up bad. Don't use it unless he is the only BT in the party. If he is the only BT, you can get a bit more out of it by pressing Hyperdrive or using Meteor, because those are the only attacks he has that don't have high turn rate. On his last BT turn, use Havoc Wing. It's the last turn, so use that last turn on an attack that can take the most advantage of his BT effect. You can use this same strategy to make his BT Plus effect last longer too, but this is now largely unnecessary. If you built a decent party, Skill 2 will be doing 1,000,000 damage every turn, or more, and enemies will melt before his BT effect runs out. Kefka's generic debuffs can be overwritten by stronger debuffs of the same type. For example, if you pair Kefka and Vanille together, Vanille's Skill 1 will override Kefka's attack down and defense down, even when framed. Do note that if you do this, Kefka will no longer be able to increase their duration. Only Vanille will be able to. But hey, now those potent as hell debuffs are framed, so it's a good trade-off. For calls, as I mentioned before, you'll want Brv Damage up and HP Damage up related calls, both now and into the future. Kurasame, Sephiroth, Dark Knight Cecil, Jack. Imperil calls like Xanda are also always nice to have. 2 other good calls you might want to look into for the level 90 era are Kate Sit / Ketshi or Iroha, because they'll enable Kefka's Skill 2 to hit its caps easier. Again, Kefka's damage ceiling is insanely high, but you will need to supplement him with proper supports and calls to hit that ceiling. And now for the final section of the guide. Where should I be using Kefka going forward? What fights does he excel in? Reno LC Lufenia, I'll be going the HP Silence strat, same deal with Act 3, Chapter 4, Part 1. Rude LC Lufenia, I'll be going the HP Silence strat, though you can use whatever strat you want. Note that on 3 enemies there is currently a bug that causes Kefka's skills to revert to their base versions when there are 7 debuffs on 3 enemies. Hopefully it's fixed on global by this time. Kefka's Sneering Clown debuff handles the orb. Transcendence 4 left gate, Kefka will trivialize the stage so long as you can bring 2 ranged damage dealers to carry the orb. I'm not going to use Kefka here. His rework and BT Plus and level 90 are so powerful it feels like a waste to use him here. Xanda, LC Lufenia, I will go the HP Silence strat, and I'll probably run XDef and Zell just to show that off. There will be a drought of content where Kefka won't be super noteworthy up until Aranea LC Lufenia Plus, where he will help with the orb by using his Instant Break EX when the bosses halt their Brave from dropping below 1. He's still usable on content, mind you, but he doesn't do anything for the orbs, and there are better options out there at this point. There is one more fight Kefka will be extremely useful for up until his level 90 and BT+, where he is so insane he works almost everywhere. And that is the Twins Heretic Lufenia Plus with the Lamia Queen. Very few characters can actually raise the orb without using a finish burst. Kefka's LD attack is one of the few abilities that can raise the orb. The orb is do 800k damage in a single turn. Not action, turn. This is why you'll want to blue Kefka, because his hyperdrive can hit 300k per target pre-level 90 era. He's also incredibly useful for other aspects of the fight, because the mannequins the Lamia Queen summon are incredibly HP attack happy. Again, beware this is another 3 enemy fight, and currently Kefka is bugged on both JP and Global in this regard. The last fight where Kefka will be useful before his level 90 is Machina's BT Plus Lufenia, because he can raise the orb with his EX. Though the orb for this fight is non-lethal, and you will likely have better options. Alright, that should be everything you need to know about playing Kefka, and making teams for him. Please share the video around so that more people can learn how to build a team around Kefka, and dispel some fears of how limiting his options seem to be on the surface. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications. Also be sure to follow my Twitch, because I stream Opera Omnia content as it goes live, and you get to watch me be miserable every time I pity a character when I spend gems. It happens a lot.